Well, Mitch McConnell did not cry today. The United States set a record today, the largest number of people to die in this country on one day from the coronavirus, 3,046 deaths. But Mitch McConnell did not cry today. More people than were killed on 9/11, but Mitch McConnell did not cry today. There are more people in hospital beds tonight in America being treated for coronavirus than at any point this year. The highest number ever, 106,688 people in hospital beds tonight, many of them fighting for their lives with their families, not knowing if they will ever see them again. But Mitch McConnell did not cry today. Millions of people out of work, lost their jobs and their income to the coronavirus pandemic, unable to pay their rent, waiting in food lines. But Mitch McConnell did not cry today. Not for them. Not for any of the people suffering tonight in America. Mitch McConnell did nothing for those people again today. The only reason we know Mitch McConnell can cry is that exactly 1 week ago today, Mitch McConnell cried. He cried on the Senate floor after listening to the farewell speech of the retiring and utterly undistinguished Republican senator from Tennessee, Lamar Alexander. Mitch McConnell cried. For Lamar Alexander, who isn't sick, who wasn't dying like the 3,046 people who died in this country today from COVID, cried for. The one time we have seen him cry. Lamar Alexander was a fully reliable tool of Mitch McConnell in the United States Senate. Lamar Alexander had no guiding principle stronger than doing what Mitch McConnell wanted him to do. And nothing could be more important to Mitch McConnell, more endearing to Mitch McConnell than that kind of blind loyalty to Mitch McConnell and his mission. Mitch McConnell's mission was described today on MSNBC, on Nicole Wallace's show, by Steve Schmidt in one of those extemporaneous short speeches of his that just stop you in your tracks and force you to not just listen, but to say the words again in your head and think. And every time you think about the most forceful things that Steve Schmidt says, the most sharp-edged things that he says about the people who he used to work for in the Republican Party, you know that it's true. And Steve Schmidt saying it about Republicans makes it all the more importantly true. Steve Schmidt ran John McCain's campaign for president. Steve Schmidt has always wanted a Republican to be president of the United States until Donald Trump became the Republican Party's nominee for president. What Steve Schmidt said today explained everything. Everything that Republicans try to do to suppress the vote in places like Georgia, which we will discuss later in this hour, everything Republicans do in support of Donald Trump's completely frivolous lawsuits about the election, everything Republicans do in Washington all day long, every day, was explained by Steve Schmidt in this one searing sentence in the middle of a riveting soliloquy on what the Republican Party has become.
The Republican Party is an organized conspiracy for the purposes of maintaining power for self-interest.
An organized conspiracy for the purposes of maintaining power. In Steve Schmidt's analysis, Ted Cruz is a participant in that organized conspiracy. And so Ted Cruz said yes when Donald Trump asked him last night if he would be willing to argue the case for him in front of the United States Supreme Court, filed by the Texas Attorney General, seeking to invalidate the election results in 4 states, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin. In the New York Times reporting of Donald Trump's request for Ted Cruz to represent him before the Supreme Court, there was no indication that Donald Trump had to apologize to Ted Cruz before Ted Cruz accepted the assignment. Donald Trump, of course, famously insulted Ted Cruz's wife during the presidential campaign in 2016 when Ted Cruz was running against Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, at the same time, suggested that Ted Cruz's father was involved in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. At the time, Ted Cruz said that Donald Trump was, Ted Cruz's words, a sniveling coward, and, Ted Cruz's word, a rat. But Ted Cruz doesn't need an apology from Donald Trump because, as Steve Schmidt said, Ted Cruz is part of an organized conspiracy for the purposes of maintaining power. Nothing personal. And the way Ted Cruz remains a member of that conspiracy is by getting Trump supporters in Texas to vote for him. Ted Cruz will probably never get the chance to appear before the United States Supreme Court in that case because the Supreme Court is very unlikely to accept the preposterous case to throw out millions of votes. Ted Cruz did not offer to help anyone suffering either physically or economically from the coronavirus pandemic this week. Ted Cruz did not offer to help support the people in Texas who have created some of the longest lines in the country at food banks. Ted Cruz did not try to help anyone who can't pay their rent after COVID-19 took their jobs away. Our first guest tonight, Congresswoman Katie Porter, just couldn't take it anymore. She couldn't take what Mitch McConnell is doing. And she explained it all on Twitter today. She wrote, "When I came to Congress, I knew I had a responsibility to pull back the curtain for the American people and expose corruption in real time. So I'm filling you in on Senator McConnell's attempts over the last 8 days to tank a bipartisan COVID relief bill. You may have heard that Democrats and Republicans have agreed upon spending $900 billion to fund another round of small business loans, support hospitals and essential workers, and help the 10 million people who lost their jobs through no fault of their own. Everyone at the negotiating table, including Senate Republicans, has agreed to a compromise except one. Mitch McConnell is refusing to bring it to the floor unless it wipes away all COVID-related lawsuits filed that allege injury or death due to corporate negligence. These lawsuits represent the worst of the worst examples of disregard for human life, cases filed on behalf of nursing home patients and grocery store workers who died because the company in charge of keeping them safe prioritized cutting costs over protecting them. The same McConnell who said that President Trump is 100% within his rights to pursue baseless lawsuits alleging election fraud is now refusing to pass urgently needed relief unless it strips those same rights from the most vulnerable among us. This must be exposed. We might break a record again tomorrow. We might have more than 3,046 deaths from coronavirus tomorrow. The one thing we can be sure of tomorrow is that Mitch McConnell will not cry. Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congresswoman Katie Porter of California. She's a member of the House Financial Services Committee and the House Oversight Committee. Congresswoman Porter, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Take us through what it's been like for you in the House, having passed COVID relief bills, massive COVID relief bills, months ago that have been ignored by Mitch McConnell. And now we're going through this process where Mitch McConnell continues to ignore the best efforts made by everyone else trying to solve this problem.
You know, it's not just what I've been going through as a member of Congress. I just want to see what I've been going through personally. You know, you talked at the beginning about Mitch McConnell not crying today. Well, I cried today because my grandmother is dying of COVID-19. And she's dying because of people not taking responsibility for this pandemic. So it's just disgusting to me that Mitch McConnell will not allow a bipartisan compromise to move forward because he wants to give away goodies to huge corporations.
Let me just, Congressman, please go back to your grandmother for a moment. I'm very sorry to hear about her condition. Where is she, and how long has she been sick, and what are you hearing about her condition tonight?
She's in Iowa, where she was born and has lived her whole life. She's 94 years old, and she was transferred to the hospital, and we elected to have her put into hospice. And so she's receiving comfort measures and will pass away in the upcoming days of COVID. And in the meantime, I'm getting phone calls from constituents who've lost loved ones. I'm hearing stories about workers who are scared to go to work because they don't have enough PPE. I'm putting food into trunks of cars to help people at food banks. This is the epidemic in America. It's an epidemic of COVID. It's an epidemic of hunger. It's an epidemic of housing insecurity. You know what? It's not an epidemic. It's not an epidemic of lawsuits. And any effort by Mitch McConnell to suggest that that is happening is flat out lying to the American people.
Let me ask you, as a former law professor yourself, about a technical point here that isn't clear to me. How would federal legislation control civil lawsuits within the 50 states, each of which have different rules for civil lawsuits within those states?
That concept is called preemption. And what it basically does is that when the federal government passes a law, in this case, the proposal from Mitch McConnell is to allow corporations to act as recklessly as they want and to not be on the hook if people get COVID and die as a result of their recklessness. And so the federal law would override the state law. Now, it's interesting to think about this. I've been thinking a lot today about my tort class in law school, where I learned about how these rules about employer liability came to be. We put these rules in place because corporations, particularly at the time railroads, were allowing their workers to get maimed, to be killed, and not engaging in any kind of reasonable safety precaution. So we adopted the standard we have now. So if businesses are following reasonable rules, state public health guidelines, they're not going to face any liability. There is no epidemic of liability. In fact, there are more lawsuits, baseless lawsuits, brought by Trump about this election than there have been medical malpractice or personal injury lawsuits relating to COVID-19. So Mitch McConnell is in search. This is not a problem. This is simply about giving his corporate donors what they want. So when I listen to you talk about Steve Smith, and he's talking about this conspiracy to keep, his words, a conspiracy to keep in power, I think it's really important to peel back. Keep who in power? And the answer is the nation's largest corporations, who want a green light. They basically want a license to kill without any liability.
Well, Rachel has covered in depth the way things have been handled in meatpacking plants, including people in one meatpacking plant at the management level making bets on how many people working in that meatpacking plant would get COVID-19. They were actually betting on it. And that's exactly the kind of situation that Mitch McConnell is trying to prevent any lawsuit arising out of evidence like that has emerged.
And we've seen it right here in Orange County. Right here in Orange County, we had 46 workers who got sick at a single call center owned by AT&T. 2 of those workers died. And yet, Mitch McConnell wants to let AT&T off the hook for having to do anything to try to keep those workers safe. If Mitch McConnell's rule were to go forward, then companies would not have to provide PPE, they wouldn't have to follow state public health guidelines, and if they ignored all those rules to put profit ahead of people, and people died as a result, they'd get off the hook. That's what Mitch McConnell is holding up relief to hungry people, people facing eviction over.
The bills that the House has passed that Mitch McConnell has just stiffed, not even given a chance to even be considered there, it has a pernicious effect of making Washington and the national media ignore those bills because they don't have a chance to pass the Senate. It's important work that you've been doing, Nancy Pelosi's been doing over the whole year that just gets ignored because of this McConnell roadblock.
Well, I think that's understandable from the perspective of the American people. They need help. They need food on the table. They need a roof over their head. They need unemployment assistance. They need these things. And a bill that doesn't become a law doesn't improve and change their lives. So I understand and deeply sympathize with the American people, but I want them to understand that what's holding us back is standing up to make sure that they're going to be safe in the workplace, that our essential workers will have to have reasonable safety precautions in the workplace, that nursing home patients will have to be protected by nursing homes following reasonable safety precautions. That's what we're fighting for.
Congresswoman Katie Porter, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I'm very sorry for what you and your family are experiencing now with your grandmother. And I am, as ever, impressed by your commitment to working for your constituents and the people of this country, even under these really difficult personal circumstances for yourself. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.